The Arizona Territory, 1876. A land of baked earth and endless sky, where the sun showed no mercy. Sarah Bennett felt its glare through the thin canvas of the stagecoach, a constant, oppressive weight. She pulled her shawl tighter, a useless habit from the cool, damp air of Boston. Every lurch and shudder of the wheels on the rutted trail was a reminder. She was a world away from home, chasing the ghost of a man she barely knew anymore. Her father. Across from her, an old-timer with a face like a dried riverbed offered a kind smile. "First time out west, miss?" His voice was gravelly, worn smooth by years of dust and sun. Sarah managed a weak smile in return. "Yes. I'm on my way to Fort Apache. My father is stationed there." The words felt foreign on her tongue. Father. She clutched the letter in her pocket, the paper so thin from rereading it might turn to dust. 3 years. 3 years since her mother's passing, since Colonel William Bennett had left her with distant relatives and marched off to command a forgotten outpost on the edge of the world. Now, at 19, she was finally being summoned. The old-timer's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Fort Apache? That's dangerous country, miss. Apache raids have been on the rise." Sarah nodded, trying to look brave. "I'm aware of the risks." But was she? The stories in the Eastern papers painted the Apache as bloodthirsty savages, specters of the wilderness. She tried to picture them, but her mind could only conjure crude drawings from dime novels. The reality, she feared, was something far worse. A shout from the driver cut through her thoughts. "Watson Station! 10 minutes out! Last stop till the fort tomorrow!" Sarah peered through the dusty window. A cluster of wooden buildings shimmered in the heat haze. A tiny, fragile outpost of civilization. As the stagecoach groaned to a halt, the station owner, a large man with a mustache that seemed to have a life of its own, helped her down. Her single trunk, holding the last remnants of her Boston life, was thudded onto the porch. "Room upstairs for the night, miss," the man grunted. That evening, the dining room was quiet, the air thick with the smell of beans and stale coffee. Sarah was picking at her meal when the doors burst open, and a squad of cavalry soldiers strode in, their blue uniforms caked in trail dust. One man stood taller than the rest, his dark hair streaked with gray, his face a mask of command. But as his eyes found Sarah, the mask cracked. "Father," she whispered, rising to her feet. Colonel Bennett crossed the room, his embrace stiff and unfamiliar. "Sarah, you've grown." He cleared his throat, avoiding her eyes. "There's been a change of plans. Apaches were spotted on the trail. We're escorting all civilians to the fort, tonight." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Fear and a strange, thrilling excitement warred within her. "Tonight? But—" "No arguments," he cut her off, his voice the bark of a commander. "We leave in 1 hour." As she scrambled to repack her belongings, a feeling of unease settled over her. Her father wasn't just being cautious. He was afraid. And he was hiding something. The way he looked at her trunk. The way his hand kept straying to the leather satchel on his belt. It wasn't just a father's concern. It was the anxiety of a man carrying a heavy secret. The West was already showing its teeth, and she had a terrible feeling the night was just beginning. The journey was a tense moonlit crawl through a landscape of alien shapes. Giant cacti stood like silent sentinels, and the rocks took on the forms of sleeping beasts. Colonel Bennett rode beside the wagon, his hand never far from his pistol. "Eyes open, men," he ordered, his voice a low growl. "Scouts reported movement in these hills." Sarah watched him, trying to bridge the 3-year gap between them. The man she remembered wrote long, thoughtful letters. This man was a stranger, coiled as tight as a spring, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows. He wasn't just expecting a raid. He was expecting a specific enemy. Inside the wagon, a missionary and his wife huddled together, praying in low murmurs. Sarah found their piety unsettling. They seemed to be preparing for death, not praying for deliverance. She glanced again at her father's satchel. What was in it that was worth all this? Worth risking a night ride through hostile territory? From a high ridge, unseen, a pair of dark eyes watched the procession. They belonged to a young warrior named Taz. But he wasn't watching the soldiers, or the wagon, or the prize horses. He was watching the colonel, and he was waiting for a signal. The attack, when it came, was not the chaotic savagery Sarah had read about. It was a masterpiece of lethal precision. It happened at dawn. War cries sliced the morning air as warriors rose from the very rocks themselves, a tide of painted faces and deadly intent. "Take cover!" her father yelled, his pistol already drawn. "Protect the civilians!" Sarah dove to the floor of the wagon, the missionary's wife screaming beside her. Through the canvas, she saw blue uniforms fall, not in ones and twos, but in waves. The attack wasn't random. It was an execution. "Sarah!" Her father was at the wagon's edge, his face grim. "The rocks! Run for the rocks now!" She didn't hesitate. She scrambled out, the air thick with gunpowder and the coppery smell of blood. She ran, her lungs burning. A warrior materialized in her path, his face a nightmare of red and black paint. Before she could scream, her father was there, slamming the butt of his rifle into the man's head. "Keep moving!" he roared, firing his pistol. They reached a narrow crevice between two massive boulders. He shoved her inside. "Stay here. Don't move until reinforcements arrive. Do you understand?" "Father, no!" He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes boring into hers. "That's an order, Sarah." His expression softened for a fleeting moment, a glimpse of the man she remembered. "I've lost too much time with you already. I won't lose you." And then he was gone, plunging back into the heart of the fight. She watched, paralyzed, as the last of the soldiers were cut down. Her father fought like a demon, a small island of defiance in a sea of violence. An arrow took him in the shoulder. He staggered but kept fighting. A second arrow struck his leg. He fell to one knee. A warrior, taller than the rest, with a single eagle feather in his hair, approached him. The colonel raised his pistol. It clicked empty. The warrior raised his tomahawk. Sarah bit her own hand to keep from screaming as her father fell. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The survivors were rounded up, the wagons ransacked. Sarah stayed hidden, every muscle screaming, her mind a blank slate of horror. As the sun climbed, the Apache began to gather their spoils. The tall warrior, the one who had killed her father, seemed to be their leader. He moved with an air of absolute authority. He was overseeing the loading of goods onto the soldiers' horses when he suddenly stopped. He tilted his head as if listening to a sound only he could hear. And then, to Sarah's soul-freezing terror, he turned and looked directly at her hiding place. He couldn't have seen her. He couldn't have heard her. But he walked toward the rocks, his steps slow, deliberate, the movements of a predator that knows its prey is trapped. The warrior's shadow fell over her. Sarah looked up, expecting to see hate, but his eyes held something else. A calm, chilling assessment. He wasn't looking at a prize of war. He was looking for something he had lost. "Please," she whispered, the word useless. He reached down and pulled her to her feet. His grip was like iron. He didn't look at her face, but at the small silver locket around her neck, the one her mother had given her. His eyes narrowed. "Taz," he said, touching his own chest. Then he pointed at her, waiting. "Sarah," she breathed. He nodded once, then shouted to his companions. They gathered, their conversation a flurry of guttural sounds. But their eyes weren't on her. They were on the locket. They weren't deciding her fate. They were confirming an identity. Finally, Taz turned back to her. He motioned for her to follow. When she hesitated, he spoke a single word in broken English. "Come." He wasn't taking a captive. He was retrieving something that belonged to him. With a gentleness that was terrifying in its own right, he lifted her onto a paint horse and mounted behind her, his arms caging her in as he took the reins. As they rode away, Sarah looked back. The bodies of the soldiers were gone. Not just moved, but vanished, as if the desert itself had swallowed them whole. It wasn't just an insult to the dead. It was the work of men trying to erase their tracks, to hide not just the battle, but the reason for it. They traveled for hours, through canyons and over ridges that would have stopped any cavalry patrol. Sarah lost all track of time, the only reality the steady rhythm of the horse and the unyielding presence of the man behind her. By nightfall, they reached a hidden camp. Women and children emerged, their faces shifting from welcome to shock when they saw her. Taz helped her dismount. An ancient woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, approached them. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, weren't on Sarah, but on the locket. She spoke to Taz, her voice low and demanding. He replied with reverence. "Grandmother," he said to Sarah, gesturing to the old woman. Then he added, "You stay." The woman, Nasha, led Sarah to a shelter. She offered a bowl of stew and a skin of water. The simple kindness was more disorienting than cruelty would have been. These were the people who had slaughtered her father's men, and they were treating her not as a prisoner, but as a long-lost guest. Outside, she could hear Taz arguing with the other warriors. She didn't need to understand the words, she understood the tones. Some were angry, gesturing toward her. Taz's voice was firm, unyielding. He wasn't arguing for her life. He was asserting his right to her. Lying on a buffalo robe, Sarah finally allowed the tears to come. But they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of confusion. Nothing made sense. The attack wasn't a raid. Her capture wasn't random. Her father hadn't been on a simple command mission. He had been carrying something the Apache wanted, and it was somehow connected to her, to the locket her mother had placed around her neck years ago. The world she knew had been a lie, and the truth, she suspected, was far more dangerous than any Apache warrior. She had come west looking for her father, but she had stumbled into his war, and now it was hers. The days blurred into a strange routine. Nasha, Taz's grandmother, took Sarah under her wing. It wasn't a gentle tutelage. It was a harsh, demanding education in survival. With gestures and a handful of Apache words, Nasha taught her to find water, to prepare food, to mend hides. Every lesson was a test. Every task was a challenge to see if she would break. Sarah didn't break. She learned, and she watched. She saw little of Taz. He and the other warriors were gone for days at a time, raiding, scouting. When they returned, they sometimes brought back items from white settlements. But they never brought back food. They had plenty of food. They were searching for something. One morning, Sarah was grinding corn when a commotion erupted at the edge of camp. One of the scouting parties had returned, but they brought a prisoner, a white man. He was tall and lean, with pale, shifty eyes and a scraggly beard. The warriors threw him to the ground in front of the elders. He wasn't defiant. He was groveling, speaking in fluent Apache. Sarah strained to understand. He was offering them something. Information. About a cavalry patrol. About their movements. About their leader. The name he spoke sent a jolt of ice through Sarah's veins. Major Adams, her father's second in command. The man who was supposed to be his friend. The captive who called himself Silas, claimed Adams wasn't just looking for the Apache. He was looking for a white woman. For her. Later that day, Nasha brought Sarah a deerskin dress, intricately beaded. It was a gift, but also a command. "No more white woman clothes," the old woman said in Apache. As Sarah changed, she felt a piece of her old self sloughing off like dead skin. Silas was given a place in the camp. He was useful, but he watched Sarah with an unnerving intensity. He knew who she was. "Daughter of the colonel," he said to her one evening, his voice a greasy whisper. "They killed him, you know. Taz himself. I saw it." "I saw it too," Sarah replied, her voice cold. "Good," Silas sneered. "Then you know what they are. Don't let the old woman fool you. They're keeping you for a reason. You're a key. A key to something your father stole from them." The word stole hung in the air. Her father. A thief? It was absurd, but it planted a seed of doubt. Why was he so secretive? What was in his satchel? That night, Taz returned. He found Sarah by the fire, the deerskin dress feeling strange against her skin. He didn't speak of Silas or of Major Adams. He simply looked at her, then at the locket. "My grandmother says you have a strong spirit," he said, his English improving. "She says you are not like the others." "What others?" Sarah asked. Taz's face darkened. "Others who came before, looking for the same thing." Before Sarah could ask more, Nasha called him away. The old woman's face was a thundercloud. She had seen Taz speaking to Sarah, and she did not approve. There was a history here, a danger connected to her, and Nasha was determined to keep them apart. A week later, Taz sought her out again. He had defied his grandmother. "Come," he said, leading her to two waiting horses. They rode in silence into the high country, to a plateau that overlooked the world. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. "My father," Sarah began, her voice shaking. "What did he steal?" Taz looked away, toward the distant mountains. "He did not steal. He was returning what was taken." The words made no sense. Taken from who? By who? "Long ago," Taz began, his voice low, "soldiers came to my grandfather's camp. They were not looking for war. They were looking for a stone. A star that fell from the sky. It is the heart of our people. They killed the guardians. They took the stone." He paused, his jaw tight. "The man who led them. His name was Adams." Sarah's blood ran cold. Major Adams. It had all started with him. "But my father—" "Your father was a young soldier then. He did not know what Adams was doing. When he found out, he tried to stop him. He was wounded. Adams left him for dead and took the stone." Taz finally turned to look at her, his eyes burning with an ancient pain. "But your father lived, and he spent his life trying to find the stone to right the wrong." It was too much. Her father, a secret hero. Adams, a villain from the start. "The satchel," Sarah whispered. "The stone was in the satchel." "No," Taz said, shaking his head. "Only half. A map. To show where he would return it. The other half. We have." He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a piece of worn leather, its markings strange and complex. It was a map, but it was incomplete. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The ambush wasn't a raid. It was an interception. They weren't trying to kill her father. They were trying to meet him. Something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. "Why did you take me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why not just take the map?" "Because of this," he said, gently touching the locket at her throat. He opened it. Inside wasn't a picture of her mother or father. It was a tiny, intricate carving. A symbol. The same symbol that was at the center of Taz's half of the map. "This is the mark of the Guardian," he said. "My sister was the last. She was killed when Adams's men attacked our village 6 moons ago, searching for the map. When I saw the mark on you, I knew. The spirit of the Guardian had passed to you." Sarah stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. She wasn't a captive. She wasn't a prisoner. She was a guardian. The successor to a sacred trust she never knew existed. And the man who had killed her father was the only one who could help her fulfill it. But as this revelation settled, another, colder thought surfaced. Silas, the white man, in the camp. He claimed he saw Taz kill her father. But the battle had been chaos. From his hiding place, could he have really seen who struck the final blow? Or was he lying? And if he was lying, why? What was his game? As they rode back to the camp, Sarah felt a new kind of fear. She was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was a player in a deadly game, caught between a treacherous cavalry major, a duplicitous informant, and a band of warriors whose trust she had yet to earn. And she was beginning to suspect that the man who had just entrusted her with his people's greatest secret might also be hiding the darkest one of all. Back in the camp, the air was different. The other warriors looked at her with a new respect, a kind of awe. Nasha, however, was colder than ever. She saw Sarah not as a guardian, but as a curse, an omen of the disaster that had befallen her family. The old woman's grief was a wall between them. Silas, meanwhile, grew bolder. He would find her when she was alone, hissing his poison. "Don't believe him," he'd whisper, gesturing toward Taz. "He's filling your head with stories to get what he wants. The Star Stone isn't some holy relic. It's a meteorite, full of gold, worth a fortune. Your father knew it. Adams knows it, and Taz will kill anyone to get it for himself." Sarah tried to ignore him, but his words were like burrs, snagging on her doubts. She remembered her father's desperate fight. Was it the fight of a man trying to return something sacred, or a man protecting a treasure? She needed to know the truth. She began spending more time with the women and children, listening to their stories, trying to learn the history of the Star Stone. They spoke of it with reverence, as a source of healing and wisdom, a gift from the Creator. They spoke of the Guardians, a lineage of women chosen to protect it, women known for their fierce spirit and deep connection to the earth. They described Taz's sister, a gentle soul who had been the heart of the community. Nothing, they said, matched Silas's greedy narrative. One night, around the communal fire, a warrior was telling the story of a great battle. He described how their war chief, Taz's grandfather, had been killed by a soldier's treachery, shot in the back during a parley. The warrior named the fort the soldier came from: Fort Grant. The name struck Sarah like a physical blow. She had seen it in her father's military records. He had been stationed at Fort Grant as a young lieutenant. At the exact time the war chief had been killed. It couldn't be a coincidence. Her blood ran cold. Was this the wrong her father was trying to right? Was he responsible for the death of Taz's grandfather? She confronted Taz the next day, her voice trembling. "Fort Grant. My father was there. Tell me what happened." Taz's face became an unreadable mask of stone. "It is in the past." "It is not in the past if it is the reason my father is dead," she cried. "Tell me." He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with a burden she could now see he had carried his whole life. "There was a parley. My grandfather went to speak of peace. A young lieutenant, Bennett, stood beside the commander. The commander's name was Adams. Adams gave an order. The lieutenant refused. Adams shot my grandfather himself. Then he shot the lieutenant for disobeying, and left him for dead." The truth was 1,000 times worse than she could have imagined. Her father hadn't been a killer. He had been a witness, a man who chose honor over orders and paid the price. And Adams. Adams was a monster who had been leaving a trail of bodies for decades. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Sarah asked, her anger giving way to a profound sorrow. "It is our shame," Taz said quietly. "For years we believed the story Adams told, that the young lieutenant had fired the first shot. We hunted your father's name. When I learned the truth, it was too late. The ambush was already set. I was not trying to kill him. I was trying to save him from my own men, who still believed the lie." A wave of nausea washed over Sarah. The chaos of the battle replayed in her mind. The warrior who had appeared in her path as she ran. Her father had struck him down to clear her way. The arrows. Were they aimed at her father, or at the warriors around him? And the final moment. Taz standing over her father with the tomahawk. "You killed him," she whispered, the accusation raw. "I saw you." "You saw me end his suffering," Taz corrected, his voice harsh with pain. "He was dying, 2 arrows in him. He looked at me. He knew his map had brought us. He nodded. It was a soldier's death, an honorable death. It was all I could give him." Sarah stumbled away, her mind reeling. The man she thought was her father's murderer was the one who had granted him mercy. The story Silas had told was a twisted, partial truth, designed to drive a wedge between them. And now she knew why. Silas wasn't just an informant. He was working for Adams. He was in the camp to find the Apache half of the map, and to make sure Sarah never trusted Taz enough to put the 2 pieces together. She had to warn Taz. She ran back to where she'd left him, but he was gone. Nasha stood there instead, her dark eyes filled with a grief so deep it seemed to swallow the light. "I heard," the old woman said in perfect, unaccented English, shocking Sarah into silence. "My husband died because of the lies of the man named Adams. My granddaughter died because of his greed. Now you bring his shadow back to my family. The stone is a curse. It will destroy us all. You must take your half of the map and leave." The old woman's English was flawless. She had understood everything Sarah had ever said in the camp. She had been testing her, watching her, judging her from behind a veil of ignorance. The revelation was staggering. Another layer of deception in a world built on lies. "I can't leave," Sarah said, her own voice finding a new strength. "Adams is still out there. Silas is his spy. He won't stop until he has the stone, and he will kill every last one of you to get it." Nasha looked at Sarah, truly looked at her for the first time, and in her eyes, a flicker of something long dead, hope, stirred. "Then you are more foolish than your father," she said, but there was no venom in it. "He tried to fight the inevitable, and it killed him." "Then I will finish what he started," Sarah declared. But as she said the words, a scout's frantic cry echoed through the camp. Riders were coming, not a patrol, an army, and they were flying the banner of Major Adams. Silas was gone, and he had taken Taz's map with him. Panic exploded in the camp. Warriors grabbed their weapons. Women gathered their children, their faces etched with the terror of a nightmare returned. Adams was coming, not for a parley, but for a slaughter. And this time he had the map, both halves. "He played us all," Taz snarled, his face a mask of fury. "Silas was never a prisoner. He let himself be captured." Nasha rushed forward, grabbing Taz's arm. "You cannot fight them here. There are too many. You must run, hide in the mountains." "And let him desecrate the sacred ground? Let him take the Heartstone?" Taz shook his head. "I will die first." "You will," Nasha agreed grimly, "and so will everyone else." Sarah's mind raced, cutting through the fear. "No," she said, her voice clear and commanding, silencing the argument between grandmother and grandson. "We won't run, and we won't die. We will do what he doesn't expect. We will use his greed against him." Taz and Nasha stared at her. "What are you saying?" Taz asked. "Adams doesn't just want the stone," Sarah explained, piecing it together. "He wants the glory. He wants to be the hero who single-handedly ended the Apache threat and recovered a priceless artifact. He won't just send his army in. He'll want to be the one to walk in and take it." "She is right," Nasha breathed, her eyes widening. "He is arrogant. Pride will be his undoing." "The map leads to the mouth of the sacred canyon," Taz said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "But it does not show the paths within, the traps, the dead ends." "He'll need a guide," Sarah finished. "He'll expect to find us defending the canyon entrance. But we won't be there." A desperate, audacious plan began to form in her mind. It was a wild gamble, a long shot that hinged on the psychological flaws of a man she'd never met. But it was the only chance they had. "Taz," she said, "you need to trust me. Completely." He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen in his sister, the last guardian. He saw the spirit her father had passed on to her. He nodded. "What must we do?" While the warriors prepared an elaborate false defense at the canyon entrance, a show of force designed to look formidable but be easily overcome, Sarah and Taz took a hidden, treacherous path up the steep canyon walls. Nasha, her face set like stone, gathered the women, children, and elders, leading them away to a secret sanctuary deep in the mountains, a place not even on the maps. As Sarah climbed, her muscles screaming, she clutched her mother's locket, the symbol of the guardian. It felt heavy, a weight of responsibility she had never asked for, but would now carry to her death if she had to. They reached a high ledge overlooking the main path into the canyon, a perfect ambush point. Below, they could see Adams's men cautiously approaching the canyon mouth. The trap was set. Major Adams rode at the head of his column, Silas beside him, pointing toward the makeshift barricades. The first volley of arrows from the skeleton crew of Apache defenders rained down. It was just enough resistance to be convincing. Adams's men charged, easily overwhelming the defenses as the few Apache warriors melted back into the rocks, making it look like a panicked retreat. Adams, flush with victory, dismounted. He wouldn't send his men into the sacred labyrinth. He wanted the honor for himself. He, Silas, and a small honor guard of his most loyal men entered the canyon on foot, following the map. "He took the bait," Taz whispered from the ledge above. Sarah held her breath. Now came the deadliest part of the plan. They followed a parallel path along the high cliffs, staying hidden, tracking the group below. The canyon was a maze, and Adams, trusting the map, was walking deeper and deeper into the trap. They came to a fork. The map indicated the right-hand path. "Wait!" Silas said, his voice echoing up to Sarah and Taz. "I remember the old stories. The right path is guarded by spirits. The left is the safer way." Adams scoffed. "Spirits? Don't be a fool. The map is clear." He led his men down the right-hand path. Sarah glanced at Taz, her heart pounding. "What is he talking about?" "Silas is trying to save him," Taz whispered, a grim smile on his face. "The left path leads to a dead end. The right path leads to the nest of the viper." It wasn't a place of spirits. It was a place of geology. A narrow, winding passage with sheer, unclimbable walls, and a floor littered with loose rock, an avalanche waiting to happen. When Adams and his men were deep inside the passage, Taz gave the signal. The handful of warriors positioned above them on the opposite cliff began to push at a series of carefully chosen keystones. The rumble started low, then grew to a deafening roar as tons of rock and scree began to slide. Adams and his men looked up, their faces masks of pure terror. There was nowhere to run. The avalanche wasn't a massive wall of stone. It was a cascade, a river of rock that filled the passage, burying them all in seconds. The silence that followed was more profound than the noise before it. Dust filled the air. Below, the path was gone, replaced by a massive, newly formed rock slide. There were no survivors, but Sarah's relief was cut short by a glint of metal from the canyon floor. Silas. He hadn't followed Adams. At the last second he had dodged back, taking cover in an alcove. He had survived. And he was staring right up at them. He knew he was discovered. With a snarl of hatred, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot wasn't aimed at Taz. It was aimed at Sarah. Taz reacted instantly, shoving her to the ground. The bullet that would have hit her heart instead tore through his shoulder. He cried out in pain, his rifle clattering over the edge of the cliff. Silas chambered another round. He was exposed, but he was going to take them with him. Sarah, unarmed, looked at Taz, bleeding on the ground beside her. There was no escape. Just as Silas aimed for the killing shot, a sound echoed from further down the canyon. The thunder of hooves. Dozens of them. Cavalry. Adams's main force, hearing the rock slide and the gunshot, were coming to investigate. Silas spun around, a look of triumph on his face. He would be rescued. He would tell them the Apache triggered the slide, that they killed the major. He would be a hero. But the soldiers who rounded the bend were not the ones he expected. At their head was the young lieutenant, the one who had served under Sarah's father. His face was hard, his pistol drawn. His men surrounded Silas, their rifles leveled. "Lieutenant," Silas stammered, lowering his weapon. "Thank God you're here. The Apaches. They ambushed us." "I know," the lieutenant said, his voice like ice. "I know everything." He dismounted and walked toward the stunned traitor. "We found your camp, Silas. We found the letters. The plans you made with Adams to steal government property, to murder a fellow officer, and to start a war for your own profit." He gestured to two of his men. "Arrest this man for treason." Silas's face crumpled. He was trapped. Caught between the soldiers he had betrayed and the Apache he had tried to destroy. The soldiers hauled him to his feet. Above, on the ledge, Sarah helped the wounded Taz sit up. The lieutenant looked up, his eyes finding hers. He had followed them. He had known Adams was a traitor, and had brought his loyal men to stop him, not to fight the Apache. He had brought justice. With the immediate danger over, An uneasy truce settled over the canyon. The lieutenant's men helped Taz down from the ledge, and their medic tended to his wound. "Miss Bennett," the lieutenant said, his expression a mixture of relief and awe, "your father would be. Well, I don't think he could have ever imagined this, but he would be proud." He looked from Sarah to Taz, at the unspoken bond between them. "I'll have to file a report. Major Adams and his men, killed in a tragic rockslide while pursuing hostile forces. Silas, the sole survivor, will be court-martialed for his part in the conspiracy. He was offering them a way out, a story that would end the conflict, a lie to create a truth." "And the Starstone?" Sarah asked quietly. The lieutenant allowed himself a small, weary smile. "According to my report, it was never found. A myth. A legend that drove a good man mad. It's better for everyone if it stays that way." In the days that followed, the cavalry departed, leaving the mountains to their rightful inhabitants. The peace was real, forged in the fires of betrayal and shared survival. Sarah and Taz, their quest complete, took the two halves of the map and made the final journey to the sacred site. It wasn't a cave of gold. It was a simple, sun-drenched grotto, where a stream trickled over a large, smooth black stone that hummed with a strange, quiet energy. This was the Heartstone. It wasn't a treasure to be possessed, but a touchstone to be revered. They didn't return it. It had never truly left. They simply assumed their rightful place as its new guardians. Sarah stood with Taz, her hand in his, looking at the stone. She finally understood. Her father's mission wasn't about returning an object. It was about restoring a balance he had seen Adams shatter all those years ago. He had sent for her not just to have his daughter near, but to pass on his duty, to ensure the guardianship would continue. She was the final piece of his plan. Her life in Boston was a distant dream. The woman she had been was a stranger. Here, in the heart of the wild, she had found not just her father's legacy, but her own. She was no longer Sarah Bennett of Boston. She wasn't even Sarah of the Apache. She was Sarah of the Stone, a bridge between two worlds, a guardian of the peace her father had died to create. The journey had been brutal, the losses immense. But as the sun set over the canyon, painting the rocks in hues of red and gold, she knew, for the first time in her life, that she was finally home. What do you think Sarah's life was like after this? Did the peace last, or did the greed of the outside world eventually find its way back into her canyon? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of a woman caught between two worlds, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the strange and mysterious tales we have coming your way.